Hello, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good evening, good afternoon, and good morning. My name is Moriko Hori, your moderator for today's webinar. I am the president of WFWP Japan. Before we start the webinar, we have a few announcements to make. First, there will be translations from English to Korean, Japanese, Spanish, French, Portuguese, Chinese, and Thai. And if you have a question throughout the webinar, feel free to add into the Q&A box. You are welcome to chat in the chat box amongst yourself as much as you want, but just be aware, we don't be checking the chats. We only check the Q&A box, and we will try to get through all of your questions, but there are a lot of people in this webinar, so apologies in advance. If we don't get to your question, you can always email us after the webinar as well. So we're happy to welcome you to the WFWP webinar on peace and reconciliation in conflict zones, hosted by the Women's Federation World Peace International. WFWP was founded in 1992 and is an NGO in general consultative status with the United Nations Economic and Social Council that promotes women as an essential ingredient in creating a peaceful global society. We are operating in over 120 countries and addressing the unique issues and barriers in each region on the grassroots level and through high-level events. Today, we invited wonderful speakers who have dedicated their lives to create peace and reconciliation in their regions. Due to the corona pandemic, the world is in a more difficult situation. I strongly believe that today's webinar provides insights and hope for the future to all of us. Now, I would like to take the opportunity to introduce our panelists and ask them to share with us their thoughts on the theme, peace and reconciliation in conflict zones. Women and youth across the world have taken many steps towards creating a movement to promote positive change in their communities and the world. We will explore the challenges and victories of movements in conflict zones across the world to understand the capacity and challenges involved for women and youth when they take an active role in leading efforts for reconciliation and conflict transformation. Panelists will present their best practices and the decision-making processes that have contributed to effectively tackling the enormous crisis in their diverse areas of responsibility. Please join me in welcoming our first guest speaker, Her Excellency Nondut Pejarat. Her Excellency Pejarat has been appointed as Ambassador of AWPR in Thailand in 2020. She worked on issues related to the promotion of women, peace and security in ASEAN, and conducting interviews for research purposes. She also served as permanent representative of Thailand to the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe in Vienna during 2009 to 2012. Currently, she works as a special advisor in the Eastern Economic Corridor Office of Thailand and on the board of the President of the Diplomatic Council of Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, and Vietnam. Your Excellency, Pejarat, floor is yours.
Okay, yes. Good evening to distinguished speakers and guests, and thank you, the moderator, for your kind introduction. It is my great pleasure and honor to speak today at the webinar organized by the Women's Federation for World Peace International. Your vision that you mentioned, that women are an essential ingredient in creating a peaceful global society, is really true. We have seen a lot of women in this world who are role models in promoting social cohesion, bringing comfort, and building peace in the society successfully in their own ways. I must commend the valuable contribution of women in several status, whether they be caretakers of the families, educators, volunteers, local leaders, female police, female military, policymakers, and many, many others who have been playing vital roles directly and indirectly in fostering peace and sustainable development in the world today. In this webinar, I may not be able to cover all the relevant aspects, but I hope that I can share perspective on some issues which I gain experiences, such as the roles of ASEAN Women Group in promoting a culture of peace and dialogue of peace. I am also prepared to share some good stories about the roles of Thai women in the peacekeeping operation, in their roles also in village health service during the COVID-19 pandemic, and also women roles in large-scale national development project. Firstly, allow me to briefly introduce you to the ASEAN Women for Peace Registry, or we call it in short, AWPR, which I serve as Thailand's representative. Let me show you some slide. Moment. Yes, the AWPR, I see it as an ideal platform where women from 10 Southeast Asian countries can work together to advance women's role for peace and security. There are altogether 27 representatives in AWPR, of which 3 are from Thailand. And these representatives cover a wide range of expertise, from policymakers, educators, mediators, diplomats, to the peacekeepers. This entity is a function within the ASEAN Institute for Peace and Reconciliation based in Jakarta. The agenda that we follow is closely linked to the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace, and security. Yes, AWPR's activities are in line with policy given by ASEAN government, which encourage the integration of gender perspective in all conflict prevention and strategies. So webinars and workshops are organized to exchange views and provide policy recommendations. We also promote close cooperation with various international networks, particularly in the peace building with the peace building organizations. And certainly the current issue discussed in AWPR has been about the COVID-19 and its impact on women. We share views that the pandemic has affected women in several aspects, particularly with regard to their limited access to economic resources, health services, and security. So women and girls are increasingly vulnerable to domestic violence during the lockdown period. We have suggested activities for government and non-government institutions to mainstream the Women for Peace and Security agenda, while focusing on pandemic crisis and also the national emergency. The highlighted aspects are prevention, participation, protection, recovery, and rehabilitation. So this is to ensure that women and girls will be treated equitably, whether it be in crisis management, regular policy conduct, and development program. At this point, let me share Thailand's experiences in effort to enhance women's economic opportunity during the pandemic crisis. The government has mobilized cooperation from the line ministries and business sectors in unlocking women's economic potential. Job placement and vocational training are provided to those who lose their jobs. Workshops have been organized to enhance business and management knowledge. There are also trainings to develop technical skills for female entrepreneurs and SMEs. Vocational training courses have also been provided across the country under the government program, as well as by some women network of organizations. And yet a lot more effort need to be continued to ensure economic security for women in the post-lockdown. Here, I also would like to mention about the work that WFWP Thailand, which is a partner organization of WFWP International, has done to help women, with the skill trainings during the lockdown. Let me pass on to the next slide. So during the COVID pandemic crisis, we have, the roles of female health volunteers in Thailand, being quite obvious. I got these photos from the Google's pages. You see that a group of people known as the village health volunteers, most of them are women. They have dedicated themselves to support public health services in remote area. They are part of a network that has been in operation since 1978, following Thailand's policy to improve the health system for the well-being of all Thais. And as a first step, the Ministry of Public Health would train and educate the village health volunteers so that they could help disseminate accurate and simplify public health information, as well as give advice on diseases and proper health guidelines for other villages. And at present, there are about 1 million village health volunteers in Thailand, and the majority of them are women. These volunteers work in the front line during the COVID pandemic. They give self-care advice, collect travel information of households under their responsibility, collect health records of people in the communities, give knowledge about COVID-19, and even screen the high-risk groups. To equip them with some digital tools, a telecommunication company named AIS in Thailand helps set up the application called Village Health Volunteers Online. And such an application allowed them to set up chat rooms, organize meeting, and file report 24 hours a day. They could even record their information on the mobile phones in the form of images, videos, and geolocations, and quickly send it to the district health hospitals in that area. Let me now turn to another subject. And this is about the roles of Thai women, Thai female peacekeepers, I must say, in the UN peace operations in conflict zone. Many of you may not be aware that there are Thai female military and police officers in UN peacekeeping missions worldwide. And to date, we have Thai servicemen and women serving in over 20 UN missions. And as we see that the most affected vulnerable groups from armed conflicts are women, children, and the elderly. We are very convinced that the presence of female peacekeepers on the ground would bring increased comfort to the local female population. So there are two success stories about the deployment of Thai female military to the UN peacekeeping operations in which they had played active role in peace building and gain trust from the local people. First is about the UN peacekeeping operation in Timor-Leste in 1999, when Thailand deployed peacekeepers to facilitate the transition to independence for East Timor the environment that time was destroyed and the people were under poverty in the area. So in the Thai peacekeepers' views, the urgent task was to improve the lives of local people because peace and security are closely linked to sustainable developments. So the Thai peacekeepers engage with the local people with a positive mindset while respecting diversity and local culture. More importantly, they apply His Majesty the late King Bhumibol Adulyadej's sufficiency economy philosophy, which laid down the foundation for local people to be more competent in making a living and become more self-reliant. One of their activities that would help improve the local community was small-scale farming, as you've seen from the photo. It is noticeable as well that some tasks seem to be difficult for male peacekeepers to cross social and cultural boundaries. So in the conflict areas, female peacekeepers provide public health services to local people, such as first aid, medicine, and guidance on good hygiene to reduce risks of illness. They filled in this gap by providing women and children with greater sense of security, which led to gaining trust. They also helped gather valuable information for the mission. Moreover, they perform very well in providing medical support to peacekeepers and NGO members. The second story dates back to the year 2016, when Thailand dispatched peacekeepers to the UN military observer group in India and Pakistan in the line of control of Kashmir. One female peacekeeper was deployed in this mission and served as military observer in this unit. Part of her duty was to investigate and report on alleged ceasefire violations. And as a female peacekeeper, she can build rapport and reach out to local female population more easily than male counterparts. So the professional capability of Thai female military personnel while working in the peacekeeping missions is obviously seen. This has convinced the Royal Thai Armed Force to initiate the policy in advancing the career of Thai female military. Their successful stories are that one of them was appointed for the position of senior military liaison officer in the UN mission in South Sudan. And another was recently selected to the position of planning officer in the Department of Peace Operation at the UN headquarters in New York. And after all, I hope that these stories are good reminders for us that in the context of peace and security, women are not just victims, they can be effective agents of change. It also highlights the necessity to continue to ensure that gender perspectives are further integrated into the work of global peace operations and that more women are empowered to participate in the peace processes. The last story I would like to share is about the effort to empower and engage women to work alongside with the authorities in managing risk in natural resources and environment in their communities. As special advisor of the Eastern Economic Corridor of Thailand, I gained firsthand information as to how these national flagship projects build a network of collaboration with local women in order to promote a better understanding about climate change and encourage them to play greater roles in promoting green and decarbonized society in their neighborhood. Just to give you some idea, Thailand's Eastern Economic Corridor is an area-based development covering 3 eastern provinces, Chachoengsao, Chonburi, and Rayong. Although its main objective is to promote special economic zones which have major logistic facilities, high-tech industries, and innovation. The Eastern Economic Corridor also attaches a great importance to achieve an inclusive and sustainable growth. with socio-economic balance and avoidance of environmental risks. So what has been done is the EC executives and the local authorities set up regular dialogue with local women networks. They organize various activities such as workshops that provide capacity building for women. There are also knowledge sharing activities to promote local awareness regarding climate action, proper land use, and major development plan in their own provinces. There are also some activities to help local women, particularly farmers and small business owners, to gain sustainable income. So this can be a model which has reinforced the community building effort and attributed to government's objectives in advancing economy, society, and environment in an integrated manner. Before ending my presentation, I just would like to emphasize that there are a lot more to be done to address challenges emerging from social and gender inequalities. Social cohesion and gender perspective are intertwined and require integrated approach. Lack of financial security and education, violence against women, limited opportunities for female workers, and vulnerabilities of women and children in remote areas are among various challenges needed to be addressed effectively through legislative and policy frameworks. I would encourage the continued support at local, national, regional, and international levels to help remove barriers to women's participation in policymaking and policy implementation, and to empower them with capacity building, knowledge, and opportunity. It is important to note also that through increased participation of women in such processes, a gender perspective will be more effectively mainstream in the area of peace and security. So this is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Kopunka, Her Excellency Petrarat, for sharing amazing and very specific example of women's role in promoting a culture of peace. The story of women in peacekeeping operation was especially impressive. Women are not just the victims in the conflict zone, but we can be the agents to bring healing and peace to all these difficult places. Thank you again so much for your wonderful presentation. We will have the Q&A session after the presentation of all panelists. So please send all your questions to the Q&A box. So ladies and gentlemen, our next speaker is Honorable Maria del Carmen Quintanilla Barba. Honorable Quintanilla is a former national congresswoman and national senator in Spain. She developed work in the National Congress of Spain for Equality, promoting together with various NGOs activities to guarantee the education of girls in underdeveloped countries where women's education is still lacking. She presented and defended laws to promote the UN Resolution 1325 about women, peace, and security in Spain, and promoted various reports on the rural women in Europe, conciliation of professional, family, and personal life, sports as a way of inclusion. Honorable Quintanilla will speak in Spanish, so please change your translation channel. On the bottom of the screen, there's an icon, looks like the globe. Please click the button and choose the language. Honorable Quintanilla, floor is yours.
Bueno, muy buenas tardes desde España. Quiero en primer lugar dar las gracias a nuestra querida amiga Moriko Horii, porque para mí es un honor que me haya invitado a participar en esta videoconferencia sobre mujer, seguridad y paz. Y también, cómo no, saludar a las personas que, bueno, como la señora Pechatarana, que ha intervenido anteriormente que mi persona, y que quiero también saludarla por su magnífica intervención. Quiero, señora Jori, pues darle las gracias y sobre todo estoy muy contenta de volverla a ver porque, bueno, pues tuvimos el honor de tenerla con nosotras en el segundo Congreso Internacional La Voz de las Mujeres Rurales en el Mundo y por lo tanto para mí es un honor volverla a saludar. Efectivamente, hoy vamos a hablar de mujer, seguridad y paz. Mujer, seguridad y paz. Y desde luego poniendo en la agenda política, en la agenda del mundo, lo que significa estas tres grandes palabras. Desde luego, mi participación en esta videoconferencia no solamente es como presidenta nacional de la Asociación de Familias y Mujeres del Medio Rural, organización no gubernamental pionera en España por la defensa de los derechos y la igualdad de oportunidades de las mujeres rurales y además también organización que tiene estatus consultivo en las Naciones Unidas, sino por mi trabajo que desarrollé cuando era presidenta de la Comisión de Igualdad diputada en el Congreso de los Diputados. En aquel momento se cumplía los 15 años, el 15º aniversario de la resolución 1325. La resolución del Consejo de Seguridad de Naciones Unidas, que por primera vez quería las Naciones Unidas manifestar que no solamente las mujeres son víctimas en los conflictos, en las guerras, sino que también había que contar con las mujeres para el desarrollo de la seguridad y de la paz en el mundo. Indiscutiblemente quiero hoy decir una cosa. Hoy todavía tenemos una asignatura pendiente para conseguir que las mujeres estén en la primera fila de la resolución de los conflictos en el mundo. La resolución 1325 hizo un llamamiento, porque en aquel momento grandes conflictos bélicos se producían en el mundo y se habían producido. Ruanda, Sudán, Somalia, Yemen, cómo no, en Europa, Bosnia y Herzegovina, y en aquel momento éramos conscientes, toda la sociedad internacional, que las mujeres y las niñas eran el botín de guerra y que eran utilizadas como botín de guerra y que eran violadas, como así se demostró después de la finalización de la guerra de Bosnia-Herzegovina, que habían sido violadas y asesinadas más de 60.000 mujeres en aquel conflicto bélico que indiscutiblemente destruyó 1.000 millones de vidas, pero sobre todo destruyó la esperanza de miles de mujeres y de niñas. Indiscutiblemente, la resolución 1325 marca un momento importante en el Consejo de Seguridad de las Naciones Unidas. Pero yo creo que hoy también tenemos que hablar y tenemos que analizar cómo efectivamente hoy hay que hacer un llamamiento a la comunidad internacional en momentos tan difíciles como se están viviendo en Afganistán, donde la comunidad internacional ha abandonado a sus mujeres, a las mujeres y a las niñas, a no sabemos a qué final. Y ahora después me dirigiré en ese tema, Afganistán, porque lo he vivido en primera mano, salvando la vida de una familia entera que afortunadamente hemos podido darle refugio en España, pero que indiscutiblemente ella, la madre de esta familia, como segunda cónsul de la Embajada de España, de Afganistán en España, había sido amenazada de muerte porque ahora vivían en Kabul desde hace 3 años por los talibanes, sencillamente porque había sido una mujer defensora de los derechos humanos, defensora de la igualdad de oportunidades de las mujeres y de las niñas afganas. Pero volvamos a la resolución 1325, porque es importante hablar de la historia para no cometer errores en el futuro. España, en el año 2015, preside el Consejo de Seguridad de las Naciones Unidas. Y ahí, con otros países del entorno comunitario y sobre todo con la sociedad civil española y con el Parlamento español, en donde yo en aquel momento presidía la Comisión de Igualdad, pedimos a las Naciones Unidas que haya una nueva resolución, la 2242. ¿Por qué? Porque el informe Alerta 2013 decía que se estaban produciendo alrededor de 12 conflictos en el mundo, pero sin embargo solamente de esos conflictos bélicos, 4 de ellos contaba con las mujeres como figuras para debatir lo que significaba no solamente el desarrollo de la paz en esos conflictos, sino el papel primordial que tenían que jugar las mujeres después del conflicto. Por lo tanto, en estos momentos, 2013, que parece que fue hace mucho tiempo, pero hace 8 años, advertía al mundo el informe Alerta 2013 que no se contaba con las mujeres para el desarrollo de la seguridad y de la paz en el mundo. Y es así como año 2015, el Consejo de Seguridad de Naciones Unidas, presidido por España, y el presidente Rajoy pone en la agenda política del Consejo de Seguridad la resolución 2242. Una resolución que de nuevo insta a los gobiernos allí presentes a que no solamente hay que ver a las mujeres como las mujeres y niñas víctimas de la violencia y como botín de guerra, sino que también hay que contar con las mujeres para hacer desaparecer la desigualdad en el mundo, porque no habrá paz ni justicia si no hay igualdad, y sobre todo contar con ellas para que efectivamente el desarrollo de la paz esté presente también en la vida de las mujeres como grandes actores en la lucha contra el enfrentamiento y la guerra, y sobre todo para conseguir el acuerdo en los conflictos bélicos. Y desde luego en España, después de esa resolución 2242, el gobierno pone en marcha el segundo Plan Nacional de Acción de Mujeres, Paz y Seguridad, que contempló 4 objetivos específicos, y es así como se tiene que hacer por la comunidad internacional. Y esos 4 objetivos específicos serán prevención de conflictos, participación de las mujeres, protección y respeto a los derechos humanos y reparación y recuperación de las víctimas. Porque, señoras y señores, hemos olvidado que 60.000 mujeres fueron violadas en la guerra de Bosnia y Herzegovina. Hemos olvidado también que 300.000 mujeres fueron violadas y asesinadas en la guerra de Ruanda y del Congo. Ese es el debate, señorías. Ese es el debate, señoras y señores. Porque si no somos capaces de seguir avanzando y de poner en marcha a través de los distintos gobiernos de la comunidad internacional los planes de acción para que efectivamente haya una recuperación de las víctimas en los conflictos bélicos y también el liderazgo de las mujeres en la resolución de esos conflictos bélicos, tendremos cada año una resolución. Fíjense, desde la resolución 1325 hemos tenido 8 resoluciones, la 1820, la 1888, la 1889, la 1960, la 2016, la 2122 y la 2242. Y seguimos hablando de mujer, seguridad y paz. Y esto se tiene que abordar desde el punto de vista de lo que los gobiernos desde el ámbito de los parlamentos y desde el ámbito de actuación tienen que actuar para que las mujeres estén en la mesa de negociaciones, porque se ha demostrado cuanta mayor probabilidad de acuerdo hay y más mujeres participan en la resolución de conflictos, los acuerdos de paz duran de 15 años a más, porque efectivamente se ha contado con la voz de las mujeres. ¿Y por qué digo esto? Porque hoy tenemos todavía ejemplos que les voy a leer. Afganistán, Mali, Yemen. Yemen es un estado fallido. No se contó con las mujeres. Somalia, donde los procesos de paz no han perdurado en el tiempo, entre otras cuestiones, por la falta de presencia de mujeres en los procesos negociadores de la paz. Esta visión la tenemos que trasladar a todos los países del mundo que han tenido algún tipo de conflictos, pero también a los países que viven en paz como España, porque es ahí, en las Naciones Unidas, en el Consejo de Seguridad, donde los países que viven en paz también tienen que presionar y tienen que hacer todo lo posible por visibilizar y por actuar donde las mujeres tenemos mucho que decir en la resolución de los conflictos. Les voy a dar un dato. En el año 2019, el papel de las mujeres en las mesas de negociadores tan solo en la mesa de negociación, tan solo alcanzaba a representar un escaso 22%, cuando en 1995 ya estaba situado en un 14% en aquella cuarta conferencia mundial de las mujeres, donde ya hubo una mesa de mujer, seguridad y paz. 14% 1995, 22% año 2019. 8 puntos, nada más que 8 puntos de participación y de diferencia. Es decir, hemos crecido a un ritmo muy bajo. Todavía falta mucho por hacer para que las mujeres estén firmemente representadas en los conflictos, en la solución de los conflictos y poner en marcha las resoluciones de las Naciones Unidas de mujer, seguridad y paz. Hoy, más que nunca, hay que decir que el sometimiento de las mujeres es una amenaza para la seguridad de nuestro mundo. Las sociedades que oprimen a las mujeres tienen muchas más probabilidades de ser violentas e inestables, y esa es una realidad que debe hacernos reflexionar y ponernos a trabajar de una forma decidida. Se ha dicho en muchos organismos internacionales, en muchas conferencias internacionales, como por ejemplo hoy en esta, no se podrá hablar de democracia en el mundo, ni de justicia, si no se respetan los derechos humanos en la comunidad internacional. Las mujeres hoy siguen siendo las víctimas de los conflictos bélicos, pero también las víctimas de la desigualdad. ¿Cuántos matrimonios forzosos se celebran en el mundo? ¿Cuántas mujeres sufren violencia de género en sus vidas y cuántas son asesinadas por sus maltratadores? ¿Cuántas mujeres, desgraciadamente todavía, son víctimas de la mutilación genital? Y además les voy a dar un dato. El número de llamadas a las líneas telefónicas de asistencia en el mundo se han quintuplicado en algunos países como consecuencia del incremento de las tasas de violencia que han sido provocados durante la pandemia, durante la COVID-19. Pero lo quiero dejar simplemente en líneas generales, en una estrategia general en donde efectivamente hoy todavía a escala mundial el 35% de las mujeres han experimentado alguna vez la violencia física o sexual por parte de su pareja o por parte simplemente de una persona distinta a su pareja. Si eso lo llevamos a las situaciones de conflictos, a las guerras que se producen en el mundo, en muchas ocasiones esa violencia es silenciada, esa violencia es invisible, esa violencia indiscutiblemente hoy todavía la comunidad internacional no la ha reparado en los millones de mujeres que han sido víctimas de violencia en los conflictos armados que se han producido en el mundo. Estas son cifras escalofriantes y tenemos que seguir abordando. Y así lo hace la Federación Mundial por la Paz y así lo hace la señora Jori, trabajando cada día, haciendo un llamamiento a la comunidad internacional para que efectivamente cada día más mujeres estén en la primera línea para terminar con los conflictos que se producen en el mundo. Lo he dicho y lo vuelvo a repetir. Cuando las mujeres están en la mesa de negociación, se puede producir la paz. Y esa paz dura más de 15 años. Sin embargo, cuando no se cuenta con las mujeres, no se produce la paz tan deprisa, ni tampoco la solución del conflicto o la paz dura 15 años. Por lo tanto, tenemos mucho camino que recorrer. Y además tenemos que hacer un largo camino de recorrido, no solamente en las resoluciones, sino también uniendo las resoluciones a la Agenda 2030 en dos objetivos del desarrollo sostenible, el objetivo número 5 y el objetivo número 16. Implicar, como no podía ser de otra manera, a la sociedad civil. Hoy más que nunca, la sociedad civil, la sociedad vertebrada, las organizaciones de mujeres como las que estamos aquí hoy, tienen mucho que decir a la hora de abordar los grandes acuerdos de resoluciones de paz o de directivas comunitarias o de cualquier tipo de acuerdo a nivel internacional, porque hoy más que nunca la sociedad civil está vertebrando su voz en la comunidad internacional. Por lo tanto, hoy en ese largo camino que nos queda por recorrer y a la dedicada situación que todavía miles de mujeres sufren en el mundo, porque no podemos olvidar que en estos momentos 2.000 millones de personas son víctimas de conflictos bélicos en el mundo. Yo, para terminar, me atrevería a pedirles que hagamos una agenda política, pero sobre todo una agenda social que va encaminada a la resolución 2242 y a la agenda 2030. Y en esa agenda política o en esa agenda social pidamos a la comunidad internacional que aseguremos los roles y los derechos de las mujeres implicadas en zonas de conflicto a través de la canalización de los recursos institucionales. Que reforcemos más que nunca la situación de las mujeres y las niñas en las zonas de conflictos. Que prestemos especial atención a las mujeres más vulnerables, como son las mujeres desplazadas y refugiadas. Ya la comunidad internacional se ha olvidado de las mujeres de Afganistán. Ya la comunidad internacional se ha olvidado del éxodo que se está produciendo de Afganistán a Pakistán, de miles de mujeres, madres de familia, que están queriendo salvar a sus hijas y a sus hijos y están yendo a las fronteras de Pakistán y a otras fronteras para ser refugiadas. Ahí tenemos que hablar. La comunidad internacional ha mirado para otro lado y sigue mirando para otro lado y ha abandonado a su suerte a un pueblo como el afgano. Y cuando hablamos de paz, cuando hablamos de igualdad, cuando hablamos de justicia social, los habitantes, el pueblo de Afganistán, ¿conoce esas palabras? Claro que las conoce, pero la comunidad internacional se ha olvidado de ponerlas en la práctica en Afganistán. Por eso apostar por la inclusión de las mujeres en las labores diplomáticas de los países y es necesario seguir formando al personal militar implicado en las operaciones de paz. Hoy más que nunca, la agenda política, y termino, y muchísimas gracias, la agenda política tiene que ser una agenda de la resolución de Naciones Unidas, la agenda 2030, el punto 5 y el punto 16, y por supuesto la sociedad civil, que tiene mucho que decir en poner en marcha que la mujer sea figura principal para mantener la seguridad y la paz en el mundo. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you so much, Honorable Carmen Quintanilla. Muchísimas gracias. I felt tightening in my chest when I heard brutal facts about women and girls in the conflict zone. But at the same time, you showed us that women have great potential to be peacemakers. More women should get involved in the decision making, especially in peacemaking processes. Thank you again so much for your wonderful speech and statement. For our participants, please do not forget to send all your questions for our panelists through the Q&A box. Okay, let's welcome our third speaker, His Excellency Paolo Pisco. His Excellency Paolo Pisco is a member elected by the electoral circle of Europe and the Portuguese Parliament. He is our coordinator of social deputies in the Committee of Foreign Affairs and Portuguese communities and a member of the European Affairs Committee. He is also a member of the Committee on Migration and Refugees on the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe and Vice Chairman of the Subcommission on Diasporas of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. Honorable His Excellency Paolo Pisco, floor is yours.
Thank you very much to everyone. I send my warm greetings from Portugal, and I would like first to thank the invitation to participate in this relevant seminar organized by the Women Federation for World Peace, and most particularly to send my warm thanks to Ms. Marta Carvalho, which invited me very insistently, I must say, to participate, and I'm here with all my pleasure and honor. I would like also to start by to thank the most relevant speeches that were made before me by Madam Nongnut and also by Madam Carmen Quintanilla, which were very relevant in the approach they have done. And of course, I'd like to give my warm greetings to all those that are following us from all parts of the world. I mainly would like to let you some elements for reflection concerning the particular moment that we are living today in our days, and most particularly with the recent events happened in Afghanistan. Because of this, I would like to dedicate a part of my speech to the consequences of the takeover of the Taliban in Afghanistan, which are the Taliban are a regime against women. We must not forget this. They deny the woman role in life and society. The world is in a permanent changing, and peace and reconciliation are important for the lives of millions of people. And the geopolitics are in nowadays more complex because of the balance of powers that changed. The world knows too many situations where the lack of capacity for reconciliation cause a permanent war, attention, suffering, or underdevelopment. And most frequently, the biggest victims are the weak link of our societies, which are women. Cases like Israel, Palestine, South and North Korea, India and Pakistan, Armenia and Azerbaijan are some examples, but are just a few examples, unfortunately. Many of the conflicts of that nature depends on the will, of course, of the countries that are involved. But the worst is when they also depend on the interests of external powers that use the situation also for play its regional and global influence. And that is also the case of the two Koreas and the regional situation. Both South and North Korea should follow the good example of the German reunification. The political powers may have resistance, and among them also the United States play a major role in this context. But the people for sure want the reunification. Of course, it has immense costs, as we have seen also in the case of Germany, but the benefits in stability and peace are worthwhile to everyone, to the people involved, to the region, and to the world. And that should be the mission of politics and agents of society, to do what is fair and good for the people. But also happens within the countries among citizens just because they have different ethnic or religious origins or for political reasons. Authoritarian regimes are also an obstacle for peace and reconciliation. The violation of human rights in many countries are also a powerful obstacle to peace and reconciliation. And once again, women are the most vulnerable link. We must not forget this. Governments, politicians, civil society, and international organizations should have in their agendas permanently these situations, contributing for better lives of people, less tension and more peace, and especially a look on the situation of women and girls. And these situations could have a great impact under certain circumstances or changes in the international context. In my view, the world is facing, as I have said it before, a powerful challenge to peace and reconciliation with the new situation in Afghanistan, which I consider very much dangerous, either because there will be a permanent violation of human rights within the country, as we are already seen, which will affect women very much in particularly, but also because of the possibilities of support directly and indirectly to terrorism. After 20 years in Afghanistan, the United States and NATO left the country and abandoned the Afghan people. Women are very much afraid of the new power because they know very well how brutal Taliban were when they held the power between 1996 and 2001. Women and girls had no rights at all in Afghanistan, Afghanistan under the rule of the Taliban. They are forced to marry with fighters. They couldn't go to school. They couldn't go out in the streets alone. They couldn't work. They couldn't drive a car. They couldn't practice sports. They were lapidated if they infringed the Sharia, and they could suffer abominable punishments for their personal behavior if it not fit into the Sharia rules. So I urge the World Federation of Women for Peace to organize a conference on the situation of women in Afghanistan. I think all the world must be following very closely what is happening, and most specifically the situation of women and girls in Afghanistan. The world now cannot allow that barbaric violation of human rights in Afghanistan. United Nations, European Union, and other multilateral organizations, civil society organizations must be vigilant to make pressure on the Taliban regime in order to avoid the infliction of such a suffering upon women and girls. But there is another real problem related with terrorism in Afghanistan. And I say this because terrorism made very, very, very often, mainly also many women and girls that are used in many situations. The untimely exit of the United States and NATO from Afghanistan, it is a real problem to the peace and stability in Central Asia. And it turns the world more dangerous and out of control. In fact, the guarantees from the new power in Kabul that Afghanistan would not be again a sanctuary for terrorism are pretty much vague. Nearly all groups associated to terrorist movements, among those associated to Al-Qaeda and Daesh, were happy with the takeover of power in Kabul by the Taliban, with the only exception of ISIS-Khorasan, which has a very dangerous rivalry with the Taliban, which could increase terrorist attacks, causing more suffering and instability a little bit all over the world, as it's to demonstrate also with the recent bloodiest attempt in Kabul airport. The question is that the world should not fall on the illusion that Taliban are now very much different from what they were in the past, especially when they ruled between 1960 and 2001, because they have a radical difference towards Western world in values on human rights, democracy, and rule of law, in civil liberties, and want even to fight them, even if they may do it indirectly through other allies or terrorist groups. That situation is more worrying because while the European Union defines a set of principles and criteria to have a bilateral relation with the Taliban, some of them are not probable at all to be accepted, like the respect for human rights and the rule of law. Other countries, on the contrary, like China, Russia, Turkey, or Iran, are only worried to protect their strategical interests without any state of mind, and not much worried with the kind of regime that will be put in place, for more barbaric that it could be. Beyond that, the simple fact that Taliban have defeated the United States and NATO, as well as they already defeated Russia in the end of the 80s, is an inspiration to other terrorist movements in other countries, willingly to give proofs of life and expand themselves, moved by its barbaric and obscure vision of the world and of human dignity. And women are very often the major victims. Like, for instance, we can see what happened in the North Nigeria with the terrorist group Boko Haram. The connections of Taliban to extremist groups like Al-Qaeda in its several branches are well known by everyone, established long decades of fight against foreign domination. In fact, according to United Nations, Al-Qaeda groups still have a presence in at least 15 provinces in Afghanistan. Therefore, it still is an unknown which kind of relations Taliban will have with those groups, and if they will be determined to have a positive and constructive influence on them to refrain their potential to destabilize countries and regions all over the world, or if, like happened in Pakistan in its relation with the United States, they will play a double game to destabilize the Western world and the world in general, and use them as an instrument of pressure. This is a real threat and should not be ignored. Therefore, Afghanistan can become a powerful source of instability in the region and in the world. It will be a major obstacle to peace and reconciliation, and it may cause huge suffering in millions of persons. And for that reason, the international community can't stay indifferent to the situation in Afghanistan. On the contrary, international community should do its best efforts to avoid all kinds of instability, violation, and the violation of human rights, should follow closely, very closely, the situation of women and girls, and in the situation of the Afghan refugees, which once again have a major part of women and girls which are very vulnerable. And we all should show our best solidarity. That is our duty as fighters for peace. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much. Muito obrigada. Your powerful statements inspired us all. I totally agree to hear that, we as an international community cannot stay indifferent in the situation in Afghanistan and in many other regions too. We can say the same thing for the situation in all conflict zones, because no one is safe until everyone is safe. So thank you again so much for your wonderful speech and statement. Okay, thank you, wonderful speakers. Your inspiring speeches about peace and reconciliation in conflict zones. Your detailed stories could apply to many other regions facing conflicts. Moreover, your stories provide hope to overcome the difficult situation that we are all facing today. So now we are moving on to the Q&A session. Thank you, participants, for taking time to ask your questions. I would like to pick up a few questions for our panelists. First question is, what do you think? This is a question to Her Excellency Nongnut Pujarat. What do you think should be the next step to be taken so that the Thai women can be even more present at conflict resolution tables?
Yes, in fact, I wrote my answer in the chat box already. We do have the national guidelines and measures that would increase the role of women to address the conflict, political unrest, whether in the country or at international level. I understand that these guidelines, follow WPS agenda of UN Resolution 1325, but still, this is a process done by our Ministry of Human Security, which, I think it requires a lot more support from stakeholders, whether it be government agencies as well as civil society, to help, to push upon the participatory process of women. That is very important. Yeah.
Thank you so much. The next question is for Honorable Carmen Quintanilla. How can you work on the military scene to prevent sex crimes?
Sí, perfectamente. Bueno, pues yo creo que en España nosotros tenemos la experiencia de haber trabajado directamente en leyes para luchar contra la violencia que sufren las mujeres, desde la violencia de pareja, como la violencia sexual, como el acoso sexual. Es decir, tenemos una ley orgánica de medidas integrales contra la violencia de género, que así es una ley muy importante y que ha visibilizado la violencia, porque hay veces que hay violencia, pero está tapada, no existe, está silenciada. Por lo tanto, ¿quién tiene que trabajar? Tiene que haber voluntad política de los gobiernos y tiene que haber un parlamento con parlamentarias y parlamentarios, diputados y diputadas que exijan que haya esa ley para luchar contra la violencia, pero también una sociedad civil vertebrada, una sociedad civil que tiene que exigir a los gobiernos no solamente la lucha contra la violencia de género, la prostitución, la trata, sino también la violencia que se ejerce en los conflictos contra las mujeres y la participación de las mujeres en la resolución de los conflictos. Ahí el Parlamento tiene mucho que decir y tiene mucho que hablar, y sobre todo con una alianza importantísima entre sociedad civil y Parlamento. Creo que es importantísimo. No sé si he contestado a la pregunta.
Thank you so much. Okay, the next question is for His Excellency Paulo Pisco. What is the real proposal do you may leave us to help achieving peace and reconciliation in the conflict zone, especially in Korea and Afghanistan?
I think that these kind of conflicts should not be let to be solved only by the countries that are involved. All the regional partners have an influence. They can have a very important influence. And some of the big powers, they can, if they want to have an influence. If we really want a world more peaceful and fair, it should be less cynicism and a bigger compromise to peace and to the will of all the people that are living in those zones. And the obsession for power should not exist in the mind of many peoples. Concerning South and North Korea, we know that the difference, the abyssal difference that exists between South and North Korea. And a solution like that happened in Germany, reunifying the people that has only one identity, depends very much mainly of those two countries and the will of to do what is right for the people and for the sake and security and stability of the region. But there is also something very much important, that is concerning, for instance, in Afghanistan, the situation is very complex, and for sure that the rule of law will not be respected, as we already seen, because the ideology and the kind of rigid theocratic regime already shown that there is in general no respect for human rights and the rule of law, and no respect for women's rights. And some countries should not recognize the regime in Afghanistan without all those premises being fulfilled of the respect for everyone and the rule of law. Of course, there is another thing. The multilateral organizations, and mainly United Nations, should have also a major role. But United Nations also need to be empowered, because although there is the United Nations still are a moral reserve for the values of an ethic in our world, they can't do everything they should do, mainly because the Council of Security is tied with the veto of some countries, and not help to deblock some of the scandalous situations that exist in the world, and that would need an intervention of the international community. So also the United Nations should change its structure and rules and participation of the countries in order to make it easy to have to take the need decisions to stop many of the conflicts that exist in the world.
Thank you very much. Next question is for Her Excellency Petrat. Would you kindly say about how 1 million women village health volunteer work effectively during the COVID-19? When and how did Thailand start these 1 million health volunteer projects?
Sorry. This is what I said before. We have health volunteer service many years ago, I think more than 10, 20 years, when we start the healthcare program for all. So that's the start. And then when we have the COVID-19, we just build on this health volunteer service in remote areas, I would say. It's natural that many of them are women, and these people are trained by Ministry of Public Health, educate them and train them so they learn more about the healthcare service, the basic healthcare service. But in fact, what they involve is, they look after their own neighborhood, their own village. They help collect the health record. They keep informed the local hospitals. They have communications, regularly, and they get the application to communicate among themselves and also communicate with the district hospitals as well. So that's the way they did. It helps a lot, when our nurses and doctors around the country are very overwhelmed, with a lot of work during the COVID pandemic. So this is the basic that they helps, and in this case, I think we have to commend the work of these people because they are in a very front line. Because sometimes, they have to contact those who are susceptible to infections as well.
Yes, thank you very much. The next question, we have many questions came in. So next question is for Honorable Carmen Quintanilla. Besides emphasizing the actual presence of women in negotiation tables to solve specific conflicts, what else can or should the UN agency do to help solving these same conflicts? Oh, please unmute yourself.
Ya, sí, ya. Muchísimas gracias por la pregunta. Yo creo que una de las cosas que tiene que hacer la ONU es que sus resoluciones se cumplan. Muchas veces las resoluciones no se cumplen y no se amonesta a los países, ni se hace un llamamiento a los países para que se cumplan, ¿no? Y por lo tanto, una de las cosas que tiene que hacer las Naciones Unidas, que es un organismo tremendamente respetado en el mundo, es que sus resoluciones se cumplan, porque son adoptadas por unanimidad en el Consejo de Seguridad de las Naciones Unidas. Eso por una parte. Por otra parte, es necesario asegurar que apostar por cada día más mujeres en las labores diplomáticas de los países, así como en el seno de las Naciones Unidas. Hay muy pocas mujeres en el seno de las Naciones Unidas. Hay muy pocas mujeres en la comunidad internacional representando a la sociedad. Por lo tanto, yo creo que es importante que haya más mujeres, la inclusión de más mujeres en labores diplomáticas de los países del mundo, sobre todo en los países en zonas de conflicto y también en los países en vías de desarrollo y también en los países desarrollados. No nos engañemos, si yo le diera datos de la participación de las mujeres en las cooperativas agrarias o las explotaciones agrarias, se asustaría como está en estos momentos. Pero bueno, con respecto al tema de Naciones Unidas, más mujeres en las labores diplomáticas, así como en el seno de las Naciones Unidas. Y también es necesario que en los Estados miembros que estén en conflictos y post-conflictos se comprometan a poner en marcha plan de acción nacional en el que se cuente con las mujeres. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. The next question is for His Excellency Paulo Pisco. This is very big question, but how can the women in Afghanistan be helped?
I think that question is the big question, is the fundamental question, and it would be very difficult to help the women in Afghanistan if the international community let the Afghanistan be a closed country. Afghanistan should not be closed, and it should be if the Taliban want to have the recognition of the world, they should accept the rules of treat women and girls as they deserve, as any human being should deserve to be treated, and to respect the rule of law. If the Afghanistan will be a closed country again, probably the same that it happens in the period that they were ruled, happen again, and to have a closed Afghanistan, it would be the worst that could happen to the world, because all the things that would happen there, we couldn't see it. So all countries should not let this happen. If it is need to apply sanctions, we should apply the sanctions. Because we would not be well with our consciousness if we let all this happen. This barbaric regime not let people express all their liberties. And that's why I say that all the institutions, and among them the Women Federation for Peace, should be aware of this. The United Nations, all the countries, the European Union, all the international and regional organizations should have a close look, because what will happen in Afghanistan, if it will be a closed country, it will affect the whole world. And it implies also, because we must not have any illusions concerning the way they will treat women and girls, and they will treat the democracy and the civil liberties. We should not have any illusions. And more closed this country will be, more the world in general will suffer.
Thank you so much. Due to the time limitation, I would like to ask the last question. The last question is for Her Excellency Gujarat. And what are the measures that should be taken to bring women in the negotiation tables in conflict zone in order for them to play an important role of peace building and reconciliation?
I think we all know the character of women as perhaps, softer spoken than men, resilience, persevere, responsibility, and many, many things, which I think could be special characters that allow women, to become peace builders, as well as helping in the post-conflict situation as well. But to have women in the, in the peace operation as military as such, I don't think that this is the proper role for the time being. But we can do a lot of things to help, particularly in the conflict zone. You have women, children, and the elderly, as I mentioned, are victims. So that there are so many tasks that women can help in basic health services, give advice, do some agriculture farming for the living, many other things, including comfort.
Mhm. Yes, thank you so much. Today we're so blessed to have, three wonderful speakers. I would like to close the Q&A session now. Apologies if we don't get to your question. You can always email us after the webinar. So thank you very much. Today we all learned heart-wrenching realities that women and youth are facing, but also we learned actual practices for creating peace and reconciliation in the conflict zones. The world is getting smaller and smaller. What we heard today is not the fire on the opposite bank. Today's world needs more compassion for each other, mutual understanding is the first step for peace and reconciliation. I'm sure today's speeches broaden our mind and understanding towards the serious reality of our world. WFWP has contributed in creating peace and reconciliation in many places of the world, and we will continue to do this together with other organizations. So please join us. Please join our activities to provide hope for the future. Distinguished panelists and participants, this concludes our WFWP webinar on peace and reconciliation on conflict zones. Thank you and have a great weekend. Thank you so much, everyone. It was great pleasure to have you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Goodbye.